Hello, thank you for joining me for the Bible message for this podcast. So, we're picking up in Genesis in chapter 26 with Isaac's lie. He fails too by lying, like Abraham did when he went to Egypt. He is faithful by staying in the land, but he lies. And so he runs into some trouble, but the Lord superintends in protecting him. So, chapter 26, there was a famine in the land, that is, in the promised land, besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. Famines like this happened often in world history. Um, in recent centuries, many of the famines are essentially government caused, but sometimes they're caused by changes in climate and rainfall. And so a famine comes along, and they didn't have some of the resources that we have today with uh, some of the wells into aquifers and stuff like that. But famines were very serious, no food. So Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. Gerar is a town that's located where the Gaza Strip is located now. As uh, Isaac actually spent most of his life in the southern part of the Promised Land, and we're going to see where he gets established at another place where he has a well. But we're going to see his behavior with this. The Philistines at this time uh, apparently were not as numerous and powerful as they would be later uh, in competition with King Saul and King David. But he goes there to get food, and he's wealthy. Isaac is wealthy and powerful uh, uh, person, and with his people. So he goes there and to get food. Verse 2, then the Lord appeared to him, to Isaac, and said, do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land of which I shall tell you. Dwell in, in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For you and your descendants I give all these lands, and I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. And I will make your descendants multiply as the stars of heaven. I will give your descendants all these lands, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, and my statutes, and my laws. So notice how God's principles, his moral principles, were known, and that people were expected to live by them. And Abraham was an example of living by them, even though he failed a few times. And uh, believers can follow Abraham with his faithfulness in believing in the true God and following the true God's principles. So, verse 6 says, so Isaac dwelt in Gerar, and here we see where Isaac is obeying what God said. But then, out of fear, he protects himself. Fear is either used to protect oneself or to promote oneself. So either we're protecting ourselves from the consequences of something, especially sin, or we're trying to promote ourselves over others. Out of fear, we sometimes do that because we perceive that we need to have power over someone else. So fear is done that way. And it's very closely related to anger. Anger is our wrath in response to being hurt or to something that someone has been hurt. So sometimes it's righteous, but much of the time our human anger is actually sinful and out of control because we don't control it to do something good. Well, fear can drive us just as well. So Isaac dwelled in Gerar, so this was another place to be associated with. And the men of the place asked about his wife, and he said, "She is my sister," for he was afraid to say, "She is my wife," because he thought, "Lest the men of the place kill me for Rebekah, because she is beautiful to behold." Now it came to pass, when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech king of the Philistines looked through a window and saw, and there was Isaac showing endearment to Rebekah his wife. The phrase that's used there is he was touching her in a very personal display of affection. Whatever it was, the king saw it. So here's Isaac. He is telling a lie that's like a half lie, similar to what his father had done with Sarah, saying she is my sister and she is a relative. Okay, not a direct sister, but through relatives, and it wasn't a genetic problem at the time because the human genetic system had not declined that much. But this was what was said, but then the king saw that he was being too familiar with her. So then Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Quite obviously she is your wife, so how could you say she is my sister?" So then Isaac had to explain himself. A little comment about the name of this king, Abimelech. He's the same name as the king at the time of Abraham's sin and lying to protect himself. And this is probably a title, like the name Pharaoh. It was a title in Egypt. So Abimelech calls him out on it. And Isaac said to him, "Because I said, lest I die on account of her." And Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might soon have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt on us." So Abimelech charged all his people, saying, "He who touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." Then Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him. The man began to prosper and continued prospering until he became very prosperous, for he had possessions of flocks and possessions of herds and a great number of servants. So even in that area, which was part of the promised land, where he had stayed to obey God, in spite of his shortcoming of lying, and then he was confronted and had to confess it, God had forgiven him. Then God was blessing him with prosperity. And in verse 14, so the Philistines envied him. And how did they act? Now the Philistines had stopped up all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father in that area. And they had filled them with earth to basically prevent Abraham from prospering in that area with his flocks and with the water. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we." So at least the king took leadership to communicate to Isaac what the problem was. So Isaac just departed from there. And he pitched his tent in the valley of Gerar and dwelt there. And Isaac dug again the wells of water which they had dug in the days of Abraham his father, for the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham. They wanted to take control of the territory after Abraham had died, so it was a challenge to Isaac. So he dug these wells again, and he called them by the names which his father had called them. Wells were very important, so they were given a place name. Also Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found a well of running water there. But the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." Notice that they're just uh, pushing against what Isaac was doing and basically stealing what he had worked on. So he called the name of the well Esek. Esek has the idea of jealousy or enmity because they quarreled with him. Then they dug another well and they quarreled over that one also. So he called its name Sitnah, and that's another name. Um, Esek means to quarrel about it, and then Sitnah was to uh, be jealous, or uh, so they quarreled over that. So he moved from there in verse 22 and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, which means space or room, that there was room for them, because he said, "For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." Then he went up from there to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, and this is important to recognize, that Isaac is remaining in the land and trying to work out being at peace with people, even though they are being offensive to him. And he was able to just move on. And in a number of situations, the wise thing is to just move on. So get out of the way. You can go do something else somewhere else. So this is especially evident in learning to drive. A good defensive driving principle is this: when someone comes roaring past you because they're in a hurry, or they cut in front of you quickly because they're in a hurry to get somewhere, you need to realize that, okay, that person thinks they have to go faster than me, and I'm going to just let them go. There's no safety wisdom in challenging such a person, because they're already on edge. They're already not being very wise. Just let them go. So this is what Isaac was doing. I think it was wise. And the Lord appears to him that same night at Beersheba, and he encourages him. And this is where God is reinforcing the covenant with these different appearances to Isaac. God says, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for my servant Abraham's sake." So Isaac, built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord, and he pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants dug a well. So he's at Beersheba. It's in the southern part of the Promised Land, called it the center, whereas Gerar is over to the east, closer to the coast of the Mediterranean. So Beersheba would be the location. Verse 26, then Abimelech came to him from Gerar with Ahuzzath, one of his friends, and Phicol, the commander of his army. And Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to me, since you hate me and have sent me away from you?" So he's very clear, not really threatening, but asking what they're coming to him for. But they said, "We have certainly seen that the Lord is with you, so we said, let there now be an oath between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you, that you will do us no harm, since we have not touched you, and since we have done nothing to you but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord." This does not mean that they were becoming true believers in Jehovah as the exclusive God, the only true God. Doesn't mean that. But it does mean that they were respecting Isaac and his God, because they saw God's blessing upon him. Now, this is an important principle to recognize when it happens. If you're faithful in doing what's right and good according to God, there are right and good consequences that come from that, and sometimes it will be a testimony to the true God. It may bring somebody to genuine salvation. But even if it doesn't, it does honor God that that's recognized. You are now the blessed of the Lord. So Isaac, made them a feast, and they ate and drank, and then they arose early in the morning and swore an oath with one another, and Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace, so that Isaac is left in peace. So it came to pass that same day that Isaac's servants came and told him about the well which they had dug there at Beersheba. They said to him, "We have found water." So he called it Sheba, which means oath, and therefore the name of the city is Beersheba to this day, to the day of Moses, 500 years later, still called Beersheba. And even today, that location is there. So he was at peace with the people around him, wisely at peace. But what was disturbing the peace for him was Esau and his lack of wisdom, his profane living. He was just interested in his desires. So when Esau was 40 years old, he took as wives Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. So he took 2 wives, and God's pattern was 1 man, 1 wife. But he took 2, and they were both from pagan, unbelieving tribe, the Hittites. That doesn't mean they weren't good people just for that reason, but they did have an effect. And verse 35 says, they were a grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah. So how they were a grief of mind, their culture, their religion, their profane way of living, if that's what they were doing, would be a grief, and especially their character. Because sometimes in-laws can be the worst outlaws. And Esau, unwise as he was, so much driven by emotion, made an unwise choice in these wives, and it was a grief to the whole family. So we'll stop there with chapter 26 and pick up next time.